Beloved, your soulmate has finally discovered the truth about why you became so distant. And the moment they understood it, everything they had been telling themselves began to fall apart. For a long time, they believed your distance meant one simple thing. You stopped caring. Maybe you found someone else. Maybe your feelings changed. Perhaps you became bored, tired, or emotionally detached. Your soulmate built an entire story around the silence. And that story protected them. Because if you stopped caring first, then they did not have to look too closely at what happened before you became distant. They could say, they changed. They became cold. They stopped trying. Maybe they even told other people, I don't know what happened. One day they were there, and then suddenly they weren't. But beloved, it was not sudden. Your soulmate knows that now. Something happened recently. Perhaps someone who knew what you were going through finally said something. Maybe your soulmate mentioned you casually. They just disappeared emotionally. And the person looked at them strangely. Do you really think that's what happened? Your soulmate became defensive. What else am I supposed to think? The person paused. Then said, they didn't become distant because they stopped caring. Your soulmate froze. What? And then came the sentence they were not prepared to hear. They became distant because caring was hurting them. Silence. Your soulmate did not understand at first. Maybe they asked, what do you mean? The person replied, they were exhausted. That word. Exhausted. Not angry. Not heartless. Exhausted. Your soulmate started replaying everything. The last few weeks. The way your messages changed. The way your tone became calmer. The way you stopped asking the same questions. Perhaps they had thought, finally, they're not overthinking anymore. Now they understand something painful. Maybe you were not becoming secure. Maybe you were giving up on receiving clarity. There is a difference. Your soulmate remembers how often you used to ask, are we okay? Did I do something? Why do you feel different? Maybe they found those questions frustrating. Perhaps they would say, nothing is wrong. Or, you're thinking too much. Maybe, why does everything have to become such a big conversation? Eventually, you stopped asking. Your soulmate thought that was a relief. No difficult questions. No pressure. No emotional conversations. But now they understand. Your questions were not the problem. Your questions were evidence that you still believed communication could repair what was happening. When you stopped asking, perhaps you had started believing nothing would change. And that realization hurts them deeply. Your soulmate may be sitting alone now, thinking, I was relieved when they stopped fighting for answers. Then, I didn't realize they were preparing themselves to live without them. Perhaps they finally understand why your silence felt different. Before, even when you were upset, there was energy. You still wanted a response. You still cared how the conversation ended. You may have argued, explained, Sent long messages. Asked them to understand. Then one day, okay. Maybe that was all. Your soulmate remembers. They had said something that once would have triggered a long discussion. You simply replied, okay. At the time, perhaps your soulmate thought, good. They finally understand. Now that word haunts them. Maybe, okay meant, I'm done trying to convince you. Perhaps you were not agreeing. You were accepting. Acceptance can look very similar to indifference from the outside. But emotionally, they are completely different. Your soulmate knows that now. The person explaining your distance may have continued, they still cared about you. Your soulmate's heart started pounding. How do you know? Perhaps, because they talked about you. Maybe your soulmate immediately became worried. What did they say? The person hesitated. Perhaps they did not reveal every private detail. But they shared enough. They said they were tired of feeling like they had to earn reassurance from someone who claimed to care. Your soulmate became completely still. Maybe you really said something like that. Perhaps you had reached a point where even simple needs felt humiliating. You did not want constant attention. You wanted consistency. You wanted to know where you stood. But perhaps every time you asked for reassurance, your soulmate acted as though you were demanding too much. Eventually, maybe you began questioning yourself. Am I too needy? Am I too emotional? Why can't I just relax? Perhaps you tried to become less expressive, less available, less honest about what hurt. Your soulmate sees that now. You were not becoming easier. You were becoming quieter. And perhaps the saddest part is that your soulmate benefited from that quietness at first. Things felt peaceful. No arguments. No difficult conversations. They assumed the relationship was improving. But you may have been emotionally stepping backward 1 inch at a time. Your soulmate now regrets not asking, why are you so quiet? Maybe they were afraid of the answer. Because somewhere inside, perhaps they already knew. Maybe they noticed your smile looked different. Your replies became shorter. You stopped telling them small things about your day. Perhaps they wondered, why don't they tell me things anymore? But instead of asking, they waited. Maybe pride again. If they want to tell me, they will. What your soulmate did not realize was that you had learned something. When you told them things, you did not always feel received. Maybe you shared something important and got a distracted response. Perhaps you needed support, but your soulmate was emotionally unavailable. Maybe you said, I really need you right now. And they disappeared for hours. Perhaps they had reasons. Work. Stress. Family. Their own emotional overwhelm. But you experienced absence. Maybe it happened more than once. Eventually, you stopped reaching during difficult moments. You handled things yourself. Your soulmate interpreted that as strength. Now they understand it may have been adaptation. You stopped expecting them to show up because expecting had started hurting more than doing everything alone. That truth destroys something inside your soulmate. Perhaps they whisper, "I taught them not to need me." And beloved, maybe that is exactly what happened. Not because you stopped loving. Because you stopped trusting that love would be available when needed. Your soulmate is finally seeing how distance is sometimes created long before someone physically leaves. Maybe you were still present. Still speaking. Still caring. But emotionally, you were learning how to survive without relying on them. Perhaps your soulmate remembers one particular day. You had something important happening. Maybe a family issue. Work problem. Personal disappointment. Normally, you would have told them immediately. This time, they found out later. Why didn't you tell me? Maybe you said, "I didn't want to bother you." Perhaps your soulmate answered, "You never bother me." But maybe their past behavior had communicated something different. You may have thought, "I don't want to need them," and then feel abandoned again. Your soulmate understands that now. And perhaps this is when regret becomes unbearable. Because they wanted to be important to you. They liked knowing you would call. Knowing you wanted their opinion. Knowing their presence mattered. But maybe they did not understand that being important creates responsibility. You cannot enjoy being someone's emotional home while repeatedly leaving the door locked. Your soulmate sees this. Maybe someone told them, they stopped telling you things because they felt like they were always interrupting your life. Your soulmate immediately said, "That wasn't true." Perhaps the person replied, "Maybe not in your mind." Then, but it was true in how they felt. That distinction matters. Intention and impact. Your soulmate may never have intended to make you feel unimportant. But if you repeatedly felt unimportant, intention alone could not save the relationship. Now your soulmate wishes they had asked more. Listened more. Defended less. Perhaps you told them directly. Maybe you said, "I feel like I only matter when you're afraid of losing me." Your soulmate may have rejected that at the time. That's not true. Now they think about the pattern. When you pulled away, they became warm. When you returned, they relaxed. Maybe they started assuming you would stay. Then their effort decreased. You felt the difference. So eventually, perhaps your heart learned, the only time they show me how much I matter is when I'm almost gone. That is exhausting. Your soulmate regrets it now. Maybe they finally understand why your distance became permanent. You did not want to create another crisis just to receive affection. You wanted to feel loved while staying. Not only while leaving. Perhaps the person who revealed the truth said, they didn't want to keep threatening to walk away just to get your attention. Your soulmate closes their eyes. Maybe you never explicitly threatened. Perhaps your emotional withdrawal itself triggered them. But the pattern was there. They became attentive during danger. Then passive during safety. Your soulmate now understands. Security should not make someone careless. It should make them more consistent. Maybe this revelation came through an old message too. Perhaps your soulmate reread your conversations. This time without the defensiveness they once had. They found a message from you: I don't need you to talk to me every second. I just need to stop feeling like I'm the only person who notices when something changes. Your soulmate had replied, you're making this bigger than it is. Now they stare at that message. Maybe tears come. Because you had told them clearly. You were not asking for impossible perfection. You were asking for participation. They simply were not ready to hear it then. Another message: I feel stupid for caring this much. Perhaps your soulmate wrote, don't say that. But did not address why you felt stupid. Now they understand. Maybe you felt emotionally exposed while they remained guarded. You were showing love. Asking questions. Expressing fear. Your soulmate maintained plausible distance. If things failed, perhaps they could say, I never promised anything. That protected them. But it left you carrying the emotional risk. Your soulmate regrets that now. The truth about your distance becomes clearer. You were not punishing them. You were protecting the part of yourself that had become too dependent on uncertainty. Maybe you intentionally stopped checking their online status. Stopped rereading conversations. Stopped waiting for messages. Perhaps you changed your routine. Focused on work, friends, faith, your health, your goals. You may have had to rebuild areas of your life that became neglected while you were constantly thinking about the relationship. Your soulmate saw the change. Perhaps they thought, they've moved on so quickly. But maybe you had started grieving long before you officially stepped away. That is another truth they did not understand. Your distance looked sudden because they only noticed it when it started affecting them. You had been feeling it for much longer. Your soulmate may finally admit, I noticed their pain only when it turned into absence. That realization hurts. Maybe you cried in front of them before. They thought, we'll fix it later. Perhaps you became quiet. Then suddenly your soulmate became afraid. Why are you acting different? Maybe you answered, I'm just tired. There it was. They heard the words. But perhaps they did not understand the weight. Tired of what? Tired of waiting. Tired of explaining. Tired of wondering whether asking for clarity would trigger another withdrawal. Tired of trying to decode someone who should have been communicating directly. Perhaps tired of becoming anxious in a relationship where you wanted peace. Your soulmate finally knows. And maybe the worst part? You still loved them. Perhaps someone told them exactly that. They said they still loved you. Your soulmate's voice breaks. What? They loved you. They just didn't like who they were becoming around the situation anymore. That sentence changes everything. Maybe your soulmate feels physically sick. Because perhaps they had spent months telling themselves, if they really loved me, they would have stayed. Now they have to face another possibility. You can love someone and still leave if staying repeatedly destroys your peace. Love does not require endless access. Love does not require self-abandonment. Your soulmate is learning this far too late. Maybe they ask, did they say anything else? Perhaps, they said they wished you would notice before they had to become completely distant. Silence. That sentence may break them. Because perhaps you never wanted to leave dramatically. You wanted your soulmate to notice the slow withdrawal. To say, something is wrong. Talk to me. They did not. Maybe you kept giving small signs. Shorter conversations. Less initiation. You stopped planning. Stopped talking about the future. Your soulmate perhaps thought you were simply becoming less intense. Maybe they preferred it. Now regret hits. Those were not improvements. Those were exits. Not all exits happen through doors. Sometimes someone leaves emotionally before the final goodbye. Your soulmate knows now. And perhaps they replay the final conversation. Maybe they said, if you want to go, go. Pride. Maybe you looked at them for a long moment. Perhaps you were waiting. One last opportunity. Maybe your soulmate wanted to say, no. I don't want you to go. But fear stopped them. They did not want to beg. They did not want to look weak. So they remained still. Perhaps you nodded. Okay. Then left. Your soulmate has replayed that scene hundreds of times. But now it feels different. They used to see it as proof, you chose to leave. Now, I gave you no reason to stay. That is a much harder truth. Not that your soulmate controlled your decision. You chose what you needed. But perhaps they understand their contribution. Maybe they think, they were waiting for one sign from me that I understood how serious this was. Your soulmate treated the moment like another conflict. You experienced it as the last one. Now regret enters every memory. The nights they could have called. The messages they deleted. The apology they postponed. All the times they thought, I'll talk when things calm down. Things eventually became very calm. Because you were gone. Perhaps your soulmate now understands that avoiding conflict does not create peace. Sometimes it creates emotional distance so deep that there is nothing left to fight about. That kind of calmness can be heartbreaking. Your soulmate may have begun writing a message to you. Maybe, I know why you pulled away now. Delete. It sounds as though they have solved you. They have not. Only you can fully explain your experience. So they try again. I think I understand some things I didn't understand before. Better. Then, I know I might still be wrong about parts of this. If you ever want to correct me, I'll listen. That matters. They are not turning your feelings into another assumption. Perhaps the message continues, I thought you stopped caring. Then, now I think you were protecting yourself from the way caring about me had started to hurt. Your heart may react if you receive this. Because perhaps that is exactly it. maybe not entirely, but close. Your soulmate continues, I'm sorry I called your distance cold when I helped create the conditions that made distance feel safer to you. That is accountability. Maybe you stare at the message. Part of you wants to respond immediately. Another part remembers how many times you wished they had said this before. Perhaps you type, I needed you to understand this then. Your soulmate receives it. No defense. I know. Then, I'm sorry. Maybe you say, you kept telling me I was overthinking. Your soulmate closes their eyes. I know. I started thinking there was something wrong with me. That hurts them. Maybe, I know now that I was asking you to stop reacting instead of asking myself what you were reacting to. Powerful. Perhaps this is the first time your soulmate truly understands the emotional dynamic. You may have had your own anxieties, your own wounds, but perhaps their inconsistency amplified them. Both can be true. Your soulmate does not need to take responsibility for every feeling you ever had, but they can recognize how their behavior contributed. Maybe you ask, who told you? They tell you. Perhaps that bothers you. I didn't want them sharing my private feelings. Fair. Your soulmate should respect that. They respond, I understand. Then, they didn't tell me everything. And I won't ask them for more. Good. If there's anything you want me to know, I want it from you. This is growth. Maybe you remain quiet. Your soulmate waits. No repeated messages. No, please answer. Because perhaps your distance began partly because you felt emotionally chased when they were afraid and emotionally ignored when they were comfortable. They do not want to repeat that. Later, maybe you respond, I became distant because I was tired of feeling like I cared more. There it is. Your soulmate stares at the words. Perhaps they immediately want to say, you didn't care more. But that would miss the point. Maybe internally they cared just as much. But what did you experience? You experienced yourself initiating. Asking. Repairing. Waiting. Your soulmate says instead, I understand why it felt that way. Good. You continue, I never knew what version of you I was going to get. Maybe, some days I felt like I was everything to you. Other days I felt like I was bothering you. Your soulmate's chest tightens. That is exactly the inconsistency. Maybe they say, I was overwhelmed by how much I felt, and instead of telling you that, I controlled the closeness. You read. Perhaps, that's not fair. No, your soulmate knows. Then, I'm sorry. Maybe you ask, why did it take losing me to understand? This question hurts. Your soulmate thinks. Perhaps the answer, because when you were there, I focused on how overwhelmed I felt. Then, when you were gone, I finally had to face what you had been feeling. That may be honest. Your presence triggered their fear of intimacy. Your absence removed that fear and revealed the grief. Too late. Perhaps your soulmate adds, I hate that it took losing access to you for me to recognize what I had. No romanticizing. Just regret. You may say, I don't want to be valuable only when I'm gone. Your soulmate's eyes fill. Exactly. I know. Then perhaps, and if I ever get another chance to be in your life, I don't want crisis to be the only thing that makes me show up. That is the right lesson. But beloved, maybe you do not want another chance. Your distance may have become peace. Maybe the connection still matters, but your body remembers the stress. Perhaps you are afraid that letting them close again would bring the same cycle back. That is valid. Your soulmate's regret is not an obligation. You can hear, I finally understand. And still answer, I'm glad you do, but I'm not coming back. If that happens, perhaps your soulmate's real growth is shown by what they do next. No guilt. No anger. No, after everything I realized. Instead, I understand. Maybe they cry privately, but respect publicly. They do not turn your boundary into proof that you never cared. Because now they know better. Perhaps they say, I wish I had understood sooner. You answer, so do I. And that may be enough. Closure. Maybe your soulmate finally releases the fantasy that regret automatically creates another chance. Regret is information. It tells us what we wish we had done differently. Growth is what we do with that information after the outcome is no longer ours to control. Perhaps your soulmate takes that lesson forward. The next person they care about never has to become distant before receiving communication. They say, I'm overwhelmed. Instead of disappearing. They say, I'm scared. Instead of becoming cold. They ask, you seem different. Are you okay? Instead of waiting until someone detaches. That would be real change. And maybe you move forward knowing something important. Your distance was not failure. Perhaps it was the boundary that finally protected you. But another possibility exists. Maybe you still care. Maybe when your soulmate says, I understand now, something inside you softens. Not enough to erase history. Enough to listen. Perhaps you say, I still love you. Your soulmate becomes silent. This is what they secretly hoped for. But you continue, that doesn't mean I can go back to the way it was. They answer immediately, I don't want the way it was. Good. Maybe, I want to know whether we can create something different. Then comes the question that matters. What would be different? Your soulmate cannot answer vaguely. Perhaps, I communicate before I shut down. If I need space, I tell you. I don't treat your questions like attacks. I stop expecting you to prove your love every time I'm insecure. I make effort when the relationship is calm, not only when I think I'm losing you. That last one may matter most. You listen. Then perhaps you give your conditions. No disappearing. No making me feel guilty for having needs. If you're uncertain, tell me. If you change your mind, tell me. Don't keep me in limbo because you're afraid to make a decision. Your soulmate nods. Maybe, and you? You look at them. Perhaps you have things to work on too. Maybe when you feel distance, you catastrophize. Perhaps you assume rejection quickly. Maybe you push for answers before your soulmate has had time to regulate. A healthier relationship can make room for both people's needs. You might say, I can give you space if you tell me you need it. Exactly. Your soulmate says, that's what I should have asked for before. Perhaps you both realize the old conflict was not always about incompatible needs. Sometimes it was about needs never being translated. Your soulmate needed time. You needed reassurance. Those things could have existed together. I need tonight to process. I care about you. I'll call tomorrow. Perhaps that one sentence could have prevented many nights of anxiety. Now you both know. Maybe rebuilding starts with small things. Your soulmate does not suddenly overwhelm you with affection. That could create another intense cycle. Instead, consistency. Morning message. Call when promised. Honest answers. Perhaps one day your soulmate is busy. They tell you beforehand. Today is going to be chaotic. If I'm quiet, it isn't about us. Simple. Your nervous system relaxes. Maybe you think, this is what I needed. Not constant contact. Context. Another day, you become quiet. Your soulmate notices. Instead of becoming defensive, you seem distant today. Did something happen between us? You answer. Maybe nothing. Maybe yes. But they ask. No assumptions. A new pattern forms. Perhaps months later, you realize you no longer feel the urge to become distant just to protect yourself. Because staying close no longer feels as dangerous. That could be healing. Your soulmate notices too. Maybe they say, you tell me things again. Perhaps you smile. Because you listen now. That sentence hits them. Maybe they nearly cry. Because perhaps this is what they regretted most. Losing access to your inner world. Not your body. Not your attention. Your trust. You stopped telling them things. Now perhaps you are slowly letting them back in. That is precious. Your soulmate does not take it for granted. Maybe you mention a fear. They do not dismiss it. You share a goal. They remember. You need support. They show up. Ordinary. Consistent. That is how regret becomes repair. But beloved, your soulmate may still need to accept something. Even if they behave perfectly now, you may still have triggers. Maybe a delayed response brings back old fear. You become distant for a moment. Your soulmate cannot say, I changed. Why are you still like this? No. Trust rebuilds slower than behavior can change. Perhaps they say, I understand why that brought something back. Then, what would help right now? maybe reassurance, maybe time. This is patience. Likewise, your soulmate may fear that every conflict means you are preparing to leave again. You can help by saying, "I'm upset, but I'm not leaving. I want to work through this." That could heal them too. Mutual safety. Perhaps this becomes a relationship neither of you had before. Not because the past disappears. Because both people stop reenacting it unconsciously. Your soulmate's discovery becomes a turning point. They finally know, you did not become distant because you were cruel. You became distant because closeness without safety became painful. That insight changes how they see your entire ending. Maybe they had once felt abandoned. Now they see that you may have been abandoning yourself for too long before you finally stopped. That does not mean their pain was fake. They still felt loss. But they can hold a more complete truth. I was hurt when they left. And, my behavior contributed to why staying felt impossible. Both. Maturity can hold both. Perhaps your soulmate begins correcting the way they speak about you. Someone says, "They just disappeared." Your soulmate says, "No, maybe, they pulled away after trying for longer than I understood." This protects your dignity. No need to share private details. Just truth. Perhaps someone asks, "So it was your fault?" Your soulmate says, "It was more complicated than one person's fault." Good. Then, "But I know what I would do differently." That is balanced. They do not turn themselves into a monster. Shame is not growth. Accountability is. Maybe they apologize to you specifically. Not, "I'm sorry for everything." Too vague. "I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to choose between loving me and protecting yourself." That is specific. Perhaps another, "I'm sorry I became attentive when you pulled away but inconsistent when you came close." That one could hurt deeply. Maybe you answer, "That was exactly it." Your soulmate closes their eyes. Confirmation. Then, "I'm sorry. And perhaps, I understand why you stopped trusting the good moments." Yes. Because maybe every beautiful moment became frightening. When would the next withdrawal happen? Perhaps you could not fully relax even when things were good. Your soulmate sees how exhausting that was. Maybe they say, "I don't want you to experience love like something that can disappear whenever I get scared." That is a strong intention. Then they prove it. If they do, perhaps one day you trust the good moments again. If they do not, perhaps you leave permanently. Either way, your standards remain. Beloved, there is perhaps one final revelation your soulmate has discovered. Your distance was not necessarily a message saying, "Chase me." Perhaps they believed that for a while. Maybe they thought if they came running, everything would reopen. But your distance may have been a boundary. Something has to change before I can keep participating. That means your soulmate should not respond only with pursuit. Pursuit without change recreates the cycle. Maybe they send 10 messages. You respond. They relax. then nothing changes. No. Your soulmate finally understands that. So perhaps instead of, "Please come back," their message says, "I don't want you to return to the same situation you needed distance from." That is powerful. If we ever speak again, I want to understand what made staying feel impossible. Then, and I want you to judge me by what I do after I understand it. Exactly. Perhaps the real regret is not simply, "I lost you." It is, "I made someone I loved feel safer away from me than close to me." That realization is painful. But it can also become transformative. Your soulmate cannot change the past. They can decide what kind of emotional environment they create from now on. With you, if you choose. Maybe their final message reads, "I know now why you became distant." Not every detail. Not every feeling. But enough to understand that your silence wasn't as simple as I made it. You were tired. You were protecting yourself. You were trying to stop becoming someone who had to beg for clarity. And I am sorry I didn't recognize that. Or without you, if you do not. Until your distance started hurting me. Perhaps that honesty reaches you. Then, I wish I had noticed when you were still close enough to tell me. A painful line. If there is still anything you want me to understand, I'm ready to listen. No demand. No countdown. Then, if there is nothing left you want to say, I will respect that too. Your soulmate pauses. And perhaps the final confession, "I regret every time I thought your silence meant you didn't care." Because now I understand that sometimes the person who becomes quiet is the person who has already cared until they have nothing left to prove. Beloved, maybe that is the truth your soulmate had to learn. Distance does not always mean absence of love. Sometimes it means the presence of a boundary. Sometimes it means, "I still care, but I cannot keep abandoning myself to show you." And now that your soulmate finally understands why you became distant, the question is no longer whether they regret it. They do. The real question is what that regret changes. Do they become clearer? More consistent? More accountable? Can they love you when you are close, not only when you are almost gone? Can they make safety ordinary instead of making affection an emergency response? If they can, perhaps something new is possible. If they cannot, then your distance may remain the healthiest choice you ever made. Because beloved, love should not require you to disappear before someone finally learns how much your presence was worth.